happening now. The Supreme Court has just wrapped up a hearing, arguments in a case that will decide the fate of one of the country's most popular social media apps. In court today, attorneys for TikTok argued a bipartisan law that would either force the sale of the app or ban it from the App Store, violates the free speech rights of its 170 million American users. Scripps News national security correspondent Liz Landers joins me now live in the Washington studio. Liz, the law at the heart of today's oral arguments centers on national security concerns. What are those concerns?
Yeah, so this law was passed in April of 2024 last year. Bipartisan support that got it through both the House and the Senate, landed on President Biden's desk, and he signed that into law. And this national security concerns that the Congress saw and why they passed this is sort of twofold here. The first one, and I think the most pressing one that members of Congress would say, is the ability for TikTok and their parent company ByteDance to potentially have troves and troves of U.S. user data. They have a lot of information that they store, and this was brought up in the oral arguments today. Keystroke information, location data of where TikTok users are in the world, in the country, in a specific place. They have a lot of very specific U.S. user data. That is one of the concerns. One of the other national security concerns as well is whether or not TikTok can use the algorithm and manipulate the algorithm to censor or suppress some free speech. Both of those were argued extensively before the court today, and there were tough questions to both the TikTok attorney and also to the Solicitor General, who was arguing on behalf of the U.S. government here. Nate, I'm not really sure where the justices are going to go, but they certainly did seem sympathetic to this idea that TikTok does present a national security concern.
Well, that leads right into my next question for you, which is, I mean, sometimes when you listen to these arguments, you get a sense of where justices are going. Are they favoring one party or another? So when a decision comes out, it's kind of already pre-baked. Oh, it sounded like the justices were siding on this side or the other. Did it seem like they were more sympathetic to the Solicitor General, who's arguing the U.S. position in favor of this bipartisan law, or more sympathetic to TikTok, saying, no, this is free speech, we should be allowed to have this app on the App Store?
My takeaway from today's arguments was that they're probably a little more sympathetic right now to the argument that the Solicitor General and the U.S. government is making, that TikTok does present a national security concern to this country. And I say that because there were a number of questions, in particular from Justice Brett Kavanaugh, where he said that he believes that the data collection argument is a strong one, and he is concerned about the data collection for U.S. citizens. He basically talked about how he's concerned that over time, TikTok could use that information to develop spies, to blackmail people, to harass them. He said, quote, "This is a huge concern for the future of the country." He presented that question to TikTok's attorney at one point. So we heard that from him. We also heard that line of questioning from the Chief Justice, Justice Roberts, as well. He said that Congress doesn't care what's on TikTok. In other words, breaking down this free speech argument, saying they don't care that there's different kinds of speech on there. There can be anti-American speech on TikTok. That's fine. What he's concerned about, and what Congress, based on his interpretation of their law that they crafted, is concerned about, is that the Chinese have to stop controlling TikTok. And so the connection here between the parent company, ByteDance, which is based in China, and the possibility that the Chinese Communist Party could ask them for data about Americans going forward, that was really the heart of the national security questions.
What's most fascinating to me is that this is something that truly has transcended party. Democrats voted for this bill.
Absolutely.
Republicans voted for this bill. Ted Cruz and Democrats, you know, maybe unlikely bedfellows, but they all voted in favor of this. The then chairman of the Senate Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mark Warner, heavily supportive of this bill. So was President-elect Trump's nominee to be Secretary of State, the vice chair of that committee at the time, Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida. So my question is, look, time doesn't operate in a vacuum. January 20th is the day that the president takes the oath of office. This law would go into effect on January 19th, the day before the inauguration. Can President Trump pump the brakes here?
So that was actually...
Does he want to?
That was, yes. First of all, President-elect Trump has flipped his viewpoint on this over the years. When he was president, he wanted to ban TikTok through executive order. Now he wrote an amicus brief in support of TikTok's position, saying that banning TikTok here could be very troubling long-term for free speech and the First Amendment in this country. So President-elect Trump is now in support of keeping TikTok platforms open to U.S. users. Now, one of the questions that was argued before the court is, what power does President-elect Trump have when he comes into office on January 20th? That was actually not very clear. The justices asked the Solicitor General this question and TikTok's attorney this question too, saying, what do you think he can do? There is the belief that the president-elect could come in and issue another executive order to try to stop the banning of this. That would probably face more lawsuits, but that also depends on who the Solicitor General is then of the United States. Would the U.S. government then argue that position against itself? I mean, that seems unlikely too, even though, as we were just talking about, this is a bipartisan piece of legislation. The Solicitor General who was arguing the case today said over and over and made the point over and over that this is a bipartisan, carefully crafted piece of legislation that is something that the Supreme Court should take into consideration, she was saying.
And to be clear, there's precedent here where the outgoing Solicitor General, which in this case will be out of office, probably asked to resign in about 10 days by the incoming Trump administration, you know, has argued one opinion before the court only to reverse it when a new administration comes in, when there's a new Solicitor General. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. Obviously, this is going to be probably one of the biggest things we talk about in addition to the inauguration, depending on what happens on the 19th.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned in the intro to our segment and conversation here, this impacts 170 million Americans. So that was really the argument that TikTok and the creators were leaning into in this argument today. Do you want to take away the free speech, the freedom of expression of those people to reach audiences that they say they can't reach otherwise? They were asked about whether or not some of these creators have tried to take their creations, their sales, whatever they're posting on TikTok to other platforms. One of the creators' attorneys said, yes, they have tried, and they've not had as much traction and success on these other platforms. So 170 million people could be impacted by this decision in just a few days, depending on when the Supreme Court rules.
Absolutely. Well, Scripps News correspondent Liz Landers live for us here in our Washington studio. Thank you. We'll be right back.